Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teamfight Talkshow. I am DoA, as always, but today we've got a very special episode, not just because we've got Mort and WittRock on again. They've been on before, and they're special, and they're awesome. We'll talk to them a lot, but Esportslaw, Bryce Blum, here you are. You and I have known each other for years and years. We played a lot of games together. We've worked together. You are obviously a great TFT player. You've played in some Thursday night fights, if I recall correctly. You've been challenger a lot of times, and here you are now making the leap to Teamfight Talkshow co-hosting, casting as well. How you doing?
I'm a happy camper. I'm jumping out of Twitch chat and into the, the big stage. So if anyone out there, this could be you. You could have your opportunity to shit talk live, not just in the chat.
Brilliant. Mort, how's it going, man? 5.5 is out. It is live. People are embracing the Radiant items. How's life?
It's good. It's good. It's busy. Work-wise, we just shipped out the B patch. We also locked 11.16 because that's how our thing works. And we've got the Riot break next week. So it's one of those things you got to get ahead. And now we have to watch for 2 weeks and see what we, it's the usual live struggle. So, but otherwise it's good.
All right. Sounds fun. Sounds exciting, but it sounds like the world of game development. WittRock, You've been in the world of game development for a while. How are you doing? Not just in that, but just in general. I heard you're on vacation this week, so thank you for taking time out of your vacation to do this, by the way.
Yep, taking a little break. Usually we try to have some time between sets, but I'm just super happy 5.5 is live, watching people play a lot of games. That race to NA for the snapshot over the last couple days has been really fun to watch, and getting some games in myself as well. So
yeah, congrats to Ramkev on that one, like pulling ahead at the very last moment. That was exciting. But let's talk about let's step back just for a moment, because if there's anything that the two of you haven't done enough of yet, it's review set 5. I don't feel like it's not like you haven't done a 4-hour AMA about it, numerous interviews or anything like that. So let's of course touch on that briefly here. I struggled when we were thinking about the show. I struggled like what I would even ask, because I feel like everything's kind of been asked. So I think what I'm gonna do is throw it out to each of you and say, is there anything else you want to add to what's already been said about 5.5? The shadow items, the balance, everything, the reroll meta, the vertical meta, like there was a lot that happened. So I'll turn it over to you first, WittRock, and I'll say, is there anything that you feel like you want to add, something that you feel like hasn't been said yet about set 5 as we finally sort of close the door on that era of TFT?
yeah, I think it's just another set where we learned a lot from it, right? We had different challenges along the way. We were able to do something different with the mechanic at the mid set, which was new for us, but is at least something good to experience. I also I like to repeat this because sometimes people aren't thinking about it, which is, hey, if you really liked some aspect of 5 and it got rotated out with 5.5, it's not necessarily because we didn't like what it was, whether it's a particular champion or a trait or something. We use those as opportunities for those things to come back. I know that there are some champions from 5.0 that I'm very excited to have come back in a future set. So keep your eyes peeled for future content.
Cool. All right. I think we can do that. Mort, how about you? This was extra hard with you because what else could you possibly have to say about set 5 at this point? Like you've probably gone into more minutia about the process and the design, everything that happened with it, than like any developer I've ever seen ever talk about a stage of their game's history. So is there anything more to add? Do you want to reiterate something you've already said? Like, what? Do you have anything on that?
I did that 4-hour Q&A and I was just like, what am I doing? I don't even know.
You're a masochist, bro. That's the answer.
Know, man.
Hard to goal, this guy.
But I guess I've been re-reviewing it and reading comments and things like that. And I guess if I had one thing to say, it's that developers care about their games a lot, even if they're not as public as I am or whatever. Like they care a lot, and I think a lot of like Reddit and social media and whatever has turned into like, I don't like a thing, everyone needs to be aware I don't like a thing. There isn't a lot of talk about I like a thing. And when you post, like there was a thread, a Reddit thread on the normal one, not the competitive Reddit, that was like, these maps are really cool. And I saw that Slack that got shared in the group that makes the maps, and like that makes developers' day. If you actually like a game, I don't care what game it is, whether it's TFT or whatever, go say you like a thing. Because I promise you, behind the scenes, you're making their day. You're keeping them motivated. That's what they live for. So that's just my one thing. Is like, stop talking about what you don't like. If you don't like a thing, don't play a thing. If you like a thing, tell them you like it, and you'll get better results. I promise. So that's my one little takeaway as I re-reviewed everything.
That's great. Like, nothing tilts me more than when I'm in a Reddit thread and I see people saying that developers don't care about their game. Because I've talked to a lot of developers in a lot of different games at this point, and I've never met one that didn't care incredibly about the game that they were making. So they might not always, make the best decisions about things sometimes, but they always care. So don't say developers don't care. They do care. Bryce, this is the part of the talk show where you would chime in to say something witty or ask a question as well. So I'll prompt you here. This is your moment.
What a prompt! I have to be witty or ask a question.
Yeah.
I assume we don't mean I'm doing my best WittRock impression.
I was about to say you can be witty.
Yeah,
I use the word witty a lot, but I have to be careful with that today.
I like it. Okay, well, so just kind of building off of what Mort said. So I have a Reddit post that I don't want back, although probably a bunch of the TFT community wants me to take back, which is like 2 days into set 5. I made a post that was like, this is going to be the best TFT set ever. And, well, that was not, I mean, it was a kind of hot take at the time. It's a very, very hot take now. I'm not sure I want it all the way back because I think what we've seen with the so little being, not so little, but a smaller mid set than we have seen historically and how well 5.5 is already thriving. Woody and Mort, do you guys think that in a different world where you get balance a little bit closer to what you want it to be earlier in the set, and then get to kind of build on it from there, do you think that we tell a fundamentally different story of set 5?
So I'm going to take this one. And the answer is slightly. I think I talked about this in the AMA, but we saw this graph of like engagement. And I think I explained this where it was like every section of the graph was like minus X engagement, except for the top 1%. The top 1% was playing the set more. I think had the balance been better, I think we would have seen that graph just be a little sharper in the sense that the top 1% probably would have appreciated it even more, and that number would have been even higher. But for the majority of our players, the fundamental issue here of just less high moments, high complication, and high problem solving required to enjoy of the shadow items, I'm not sure even if we launched with perfect balance, that would have been an issue, it would have been solved. And so my answer is probably no.
I'll add a different side of this coin too, which is one of the challenges we've had both internally and externally with talking about sets is if things aren't going super well, people start to point at everything as being wrong. Right? It's things from the mechanics not fun to the champions aren't as flashy as they were in the last set to there's too much CC and they'll go down this list of every possible thing, and usually some of them are just objectively not true. Some of them probably are true, and we do need to tease those out and solve those for future sets. So I always appreciate hey, giving that feedback is good, but be a little careful when you're talking about the set that you're not just shotgunning every possible reason as here's why this set was bad.
Yeah, the set was bad specifically because of Shadow Blue Buff LeBlanc Witty. Come on, we talked about this. Specifically that champion ruined the entire set. I mean, she was a nightmare.
She was scary. Well, it's interesting because the last time we had you on, and I threw this question at you kind of in a way too when we were doing some of the internal testing, but the last time you were on Teamfight Talkshow, one of the agree things was it's easier to balance items than champions. And I went back and looked at that clip just to remember what you said. And both of you said, no, definitely not. Champions are easier to balance than items. So even at the time, before 5 came out, you knew what you were in for, kind of, because when you change an item, you change it for every champion that uses it. Whereas if you change a champion, you're changing that one champion and maybe affecting a trait, right? But
that's a great point, because I remember during the Shadow Blue Buff LeBlanc and Shadow Blue Buff Rise, you'd see all the Reddit threads that were like, Shadow Blue Buff is the problem. It's totally the problem. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Is it a problem on Ziggs? Is it a problem on Teemo? Is it a problem on Sejuani? Is it a problem on... List all the other 50 mana and lower champ? No. And it's because of these champions. And these champions, when they reach a point, become, problematic. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was,
Yeah.
sometimes it takes a while to figure some of that stuff out. Like I remember Shadow Blue Buff Rise being a conversation literally like 2 days into the PBE, and it took us a month and a half to kind of figure out what the build was and how to build, how to build a composition around it that made it really shine. So it's not always easy to figure out. So it's not like, I mean, unlimited play testing, right? For 2 weeks, you could have easily missed it.
Yeah. Very true. It is interesting though. The balance is obviously the hardest job of I think any game as far as that has a competitive thing. But the items definitely do complicate things. I think Radiant items are going to make it a little bit easier for you guys if I had to guess. But let's just move on to that. Let's move on to talking about 5.5. Mort's already nodding. No surprise there. But we know by now what the new mechanics are for 5.5. You get the Radiant items. You also have the Radiant Blessing when you drop below 40 HP, which I love how the TFT nomenclature has already gone from Radiant Blessing to Stimulus to Stimmy, is now what everybody calls it, apparently.
Yep.
It's a Stimmy. There you go. It's
Yep.
official now. But Radiant items, this does a couple different things when I look at this. First of all, it takes away items doing negative things, which is part of shadow items. It was part of the thing that made them cool, but it also created some of those less fun moments that you mentioned for players, where they might not be as familiar with the set. They're a casual player and they get an item that legitimately hurts their comp, and they're not expecting that. So these all do good things, but there's also less of them present in a certain game. Everybody only gets to pick one and all that. You can't really focus on a certain one because you only see 5 out of 35, so you can't like target a certain Radiant item for your comp and like force it, So it seems like these things add a lot of power to the game, but also just do away with a lot of the difficulty on your side of things.
The big thing that I think we correctly did this time was, if you remember, like there were shadow items that were good on certain champions, but the same normal item would be bad on them. I'm trying to think of a great example, but the one that always bothered me in a game I had was I put a Risk Thirster on a set 3, and like that was terrible. I shouldn't have done that. We made sure that anytime there was a base item, that the Radiant item would be just as good in the same situation every time. So like if you know how to use Bloodthirster, you know how to use Radiant Bloodthirster. And that really helped so far, because now people are just like, I grabbed the thing I want, but it's better. Yay! And that simplicity has gone a long way so far.
Yasuo is like one really great example of this, right?
Yep. Yeah, Hurricane. Yeah.
I think the Radiant Blessing has also been a very good complementary system to the Radiant items. Radiant items, you get one powerful thing. It might change your build a little bit, but doesn't necessarily need to because of that, hey, it's just an upgraded version property. But the Blessing can change the way your game plays out a lot. Tome of Traits, or just generally the broader uncraftable emblems, or just having a different power curve than you were expecting for the game, right? I'm really enjoying both playing and watching players try to manage their life total in a way that is trying to play around the blessing and changes depending on what they see the blessing as. And I think we're hitting a pretty good fairway on there's some control over it, but not too much, so that you actually get that game-to-game variance and can't force the same thing every time.
Yeah, because you don't necessarily want the blessing as soon as possible or something, because a lot, it could be something that doesn't really help you. I saw one that Sox got in one of his games, and it was 2 reforagers and an item remover. And so that was one where it's if you purposefully, open fort because you're I'm gonna get that 50 gold, and then you get that, you're oh well, GG, right? So so you really kind of watch the people that are already at that level, see what they get, and then like you're saying, that can kind of affect it, which is kind of interesting. But one of the other things with 5.5 and 5 in general is, we've got the armories now, we've got that Radiant Blessing. It feels, and maybe you've talked about this a little bit, I've tried to watch all the interviews and the AM and everything like this, so if I repeat things, forgive me, but it feels almost like this has become a bit of a set to test mechanics that may just possibly last into future sets as just core mechanics, especially the armory on that one. Is that something that you're kind of thinking with set 5 and 5.5? Or?
Possibly. One of the big challenges will be we can't keep adding on things forever. So, we couldn't leave even if the Stimmy was great and a version of Radiant items was great, and like all the uncraftable emblems, the Tome of Traits is great. We don't want to just add a whole nother mechanic on for set 6 or set 7 or whatever. So we're going to have to figure out what has really got the best bang for its buck. Is there other places of the game that are starting to like lose its piece? Now, I'm not committing this to it all, but for example, I think the PvE rounds themselves have kind of lost some of their purpose and interest. And so we should be looking at the like core systems of the game. What's the really good stuff? And still, we also want set mechanics to still feel fresh and different than the previous set, and a reason to come and try TFT if you hadn't played it in a while. So we also, we don't want to keep refining to the perfect mechanic or set of mechanics, because then you won't have the kind of new things to play with for upcoming sets. So that's the broad challenge ahead of us.
I'm curious, Wade, just to build on that for a second, talking about the PvE round specifically. I mean, I remember deep anxiety in early sets around Krugs and Raptors specifically. I remember leveling for those. I remember repositioning for those. People still do that. People still level on Krugs sometimes. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure 84 units basically beats this, right? Like, I mean, there are definitely ways that you can position and you can screw this up. But most of the time, whatever, unless you were full open forwarding, whatever board you had gets there. Do you think it's healthy for the game for PvE rounds to put like legitimate pressure on player boards?
So I'm just going to jump in here. Now that you've said that, by the way, it's pretty much tradition. Within the next week, you're going to play a game and you're going to lose to Krugs.
Guaranteed.
It's going to happen now.
When it happens, I'll screenshot it for you.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah, that's just it. I think we've seen every challenger player lose to Krugs at least 1 point in the last 6 months. But yeah, Witty, you can follow up if you want on that one.
Yeah, so just on how difficult are PvE rounds supposed to be, they're really not supposed to be hard. They are like a very minor check against like purely, especially Krugs, like purely having your bench and board empty from turn 0. But other than that, they're supposed to be a very minor test. I don't think they've ever done a great job, even though kind of a really ancient goal of them was like they both ask you to do a minor repositioning and cause you to think about the fact that you reposition, because that's a thing that newer players take a long time to even like get into their heads is, hey, I should be moving around my units occasionally, and just because I put this in the bottom right hand corner doesn't mean it should stay there for the entire game. So they kind of we called it like the we want to knock all of your pieces over occasionally, even if you do end up putting them back exactly where they were. We want you to have that moment where you're thinking about it. So I think they still do a little of that, but should they do more of it? Should they do less? I think it's a good time to start talking about that stuff as we start to get a little mechanically bloated.
All it takes is that one time when you lose to PvE rounds to remind yourself why we don't make them harder too. Because as soon as that happens to you and you remember how bad it feels, you're like, oh right, that's why they don't do that.
It feels really. I once won. Set 1. I won a game. I won in Twitch Rivals. I was. It was me and Kibler were the final 2, and he got the Drake in set 1, like stage 6, I think, with the original Deathblade, which was disgusting, and he had a kind of squishy board, so it just started stacking up, and it literally killed him. I won the lobby off of Drake. That's probably not great, but it was entertaining as hell. It was really funny. I
remember set 1, you get to that dragon, you're like, I don't know if I'm gonna beat this. Like, this might just kill me, Like,
well, if you were mages,
yeah.
I hope it doesn't have a dragon's claw.
Exactly. Yes. Depending on what item it had, it was like devastating.
Yeah.
There was one where the Raptors did something where sometimes in set 3, Star Guardians would just inexplicably lose to Raptors because of the way that it's stacked. Yeah. So it used to be, it used to be much more threatening, but I kind of like what WittRock was saying too, is where it kind of feels like a core component to keep more casual or new players in the game, because those rounds provide sort of a break where you get to sort of breathe a bit and think and do some scouting if you haven't done it before, which is something new players kind of need to learn to do. And even the very first rounds, like the stage 2, going through like the minions to get your first items and gold, like a lot of people are starting to talk about how those are kind of boring rounds and all that. And yeah, they're not the most engaging, but I go back to think of like what it was like for me as a new player in set 1, and then like the new players now, and those sets take you very sequentially through, okay, here's an item, here's a way you can combine it, here's your very first look at thinking about pairing up champions and traits. So I feel like you kind of need to leave it in some shape or form for the casual or the new player.
Yeah, it's a time where players are reading abilities for the first time, or
Yeah.
seeing a champion cast a spell for the first time to understand what it does.
Mhm.
So you can very quickly forget after playing a few hundred games what that initial experience is like, and that's always going to be critical. Every game needs new players, and so we need to make sure that the game doesn't just kind of drift in a way that is very new player unfriendly.
Right.
So shifting gears, but staying on 5.5, I am really curious how you're feeling about the new starts. That's a change that a lot of the high elo community has been asking for a really long time, and I know that the big tension was over wanting to feel that randomness, not wanting every start to kind of feel too similar, right? Like wanting to kind of throw curveballs at you from the very beginning. It feels like you've achieved that. Like I don't feel like my starts are kind of repetitive. They are different, but they do feel a little bit more balanced. Are you guys happy with this, or do you think there's a world in which we maybe revert and put the 4 and 5 gold starts back in the pool? Or I guess 5 is, but
So the joke answer is, as soon as a challenger player complains about a 5 gold start, I'm reverting it all and I'm taking away all the gold, and y'all can suffer because I'm tired of doing nice things. The actual answer, though, is the thing that gave me the confidence to move forward on this was during set 5, I really kind of took a hard look at it, and I was playing through, and it dawned on me that like the combinatorics of the champions in the 2 cost bucket, the champions in the 3 cost bucket, combined with the different possibilities of the items, mathematically was getting to a point where I'm like, there's enough variance here, right? The difference between a Lulu plus Set start versus a Riven plus Nidalee start versus a 3 Olafs that came out of a single orb and 3 gold start, like all of those was hitting the level of variance that I was still trying to go for. And so that's where I was like, maybe it's fine to turn down the axis of value here and just lean into, the variety. And so that gave me the confidence to do that. And so far, I would say that has landed pretty well. So I'm generally pretty happy with it. Too little, I hate to make a hasty decision off a week of a single set, but I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, I think the change to higher like frequency of having like 3 cost units in the early game that we made before this kind of bought a lot of extra variance in the early game, and I think opened the door to this well. There's a little bit of an ongoing conversation of stage 2 more broadly, and its like amount of interest and variance and how similarly it plays game to game that we'll probably still be taking a serious look at. But yeah, I too am like, yep, this was a small change. Most players aren't going to feel it, but the ones that are hypersensitive to it are going to appreciate it a lot.
Yep. Cool. Well, let's talk for a minute about some of the traits that came in 5.5. We've got Cannoneer, obviously. Sentinels are the big one. Forgotten got a change. It stacks on wins, all the Warlords to a certain extent. And honestly, the traits to me feel like they've been kind of fitting in pretty organically with the stuff that was already there. I've seen some people saying on your AMA more that they wanted multiple shields and Sentinels, but then you mentioned it becomes too much like Dragon Soul then. And I agree with that. I think seeing the shield kind of like bounce around, give that attack speed, it moves quick enough that it kind of makes up for the fact that there's only one of them. But now that we're a couple weeks into it, obviously you had your internal testing in the PvE, but now that we're a week into the live version, how do you feel like the new traits have been working out so far?
So I want Witty to answer this because again, he was the set lead here. He did a lot of this. But the one thing I want to jump in first is that Sentinel in particular, I think the entire development, the entire PvE, we were like, is it underpowered? Is it just a bad vertical? Is no one going to figure out how to play this? What's going on with it? Like, I'll admit, even the day before we went live, I'm still like, I don't know about this. I'm just like, I'm not feeling it. Thankfully, it all came together. And I think Six Sentinel has actually landed right where it's supposed to be. Yeah, and especially props to China, as they're usually the innovators. The Warmog Sentinel thing, Warmog's Lucian was really cool. That was a cool innovation to see. So that was just like, as the lead, I'm just like, oh, thank God. So
I love that Warmog 6 Sentinel build. I've been doing a lot with Lucian and then into Akshan later if I find it. It is one of the most fun builds I've played in a long time to see him get that 120% attack speed like instantly. That's cool.
Yeah,
WittRock.
similarly, I've been excited by kind of players figuring out that there's different ways to play this, and that it is you can play the 6 as a powerful vertical, but also
Mhm.
not in an extremely linear fashion, which is also something we've been, struggling with and going back and forth on. Is like,
Yeah.
we don't want to make it difficult or highly counterintuitive of how to play the thing, but we do want you to put either a little bit more thought or do something a little different in order for it to actually be a like strong A or S tier comp. And if you just play it the most simple way possible, then yeah, it probably doesn't get to be S tier in your Masters lobbies. It's not going to be that good. But that does also seem to be about where it's landing. So, and I'm glad we were also able to kind of hold the line on, I think rightfully so. We had a couple too many either like low visualized or too stat feeling traits in 5.0
Yeah.
or traits. I think the other phrasing I've really liked is the, hey, maybe this thing does something very different on paper, but the actual way it plays out feels very similar. Was a, I think, legitimate criticism. And I think Sentinel is doing its best to avoid that. It has its own dynamic. It feels very different than playing any of the other verticals. Its relationship to the rest of the trait structure as well, like, does not feel identical to vertical traits of the past. So all that I've been pretty happy with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like correct me if I'm wrong. Let me step up. I don't want to actually have an assumption in this question. So 5.5 was a lighter touch than we have seen from a champion, from a unit and traits perspective. And you swap up the set mechanic. It makes perfect sense. I think there were a lot of people who felt like not enough was being changed, right? That was kind of the knee-jerk reaction from the most engaged player base. And then I think it's also safe to say that the overwhelming sentimentality from the most engaged player base is that they love 5.5. Were there conversations? I love the grins already. It's so good. No one will give you credit for it. I will give you credit for it, right? Like I think it's great. I mean, I think 5.5 so far has been awesome, and we're just getting started. I am curious, what level of confidence did you have in that decision? Was there some thinking that, hey, we need to kind of burn a little bit more of 5 to the ground in order to make 5.5 compelling, or did you feel like the bones were already there, and with some subtle touches you could kind of make the parts of 5 that you were keeping shine?
So I would say about 85% of it, I was feeling pretty confident about. I talked about this in the AMA, but like our SA team, the strategic advisory team, had given us some pretty good data and had at least given me some real confidence on like, okay, I see what the issues are here. Even some of their interpretations of the data, I don't think were quite correct, but it gave me enough insight to be like, all right, I see what's going on here. I see where we screwed up. Let's fix this. For me, the big revelation in my head was like, we got to get rid of shadow items. That's going to buy us a lot of time. And so as the set was coming together, it definitely was like, this is going to be more fun. We're just feeling more fun. The 15% I wasn't sure on. I mean, we already talked about Sentinel a little bit because it just wasn't quite coming together and we were a little worried. Thankfully it did. Ooh, feels good. But the other bit was I kind of undid through balance numbers some of the vertical stuff we were talking about. Like, I'm going to use Dawnbringer as the best example. I pulled back on some of those Dawnbringer buffs to try to get 6 Dawnbringer and 8 Dawnbringer not as exciting, to try to get more into that really fine line where it's like, I'm at 6 Forgotten. Should I be at 6 Forgotten? Should I be at 4 Forgotten with better units? This should be a difficult decision. And that line is so thin because sometimes it's always 6. And if you're not playing 6, you're an idiot. And sometimes it's always 4, and why would you ever play Vayne and Thresh? You're an idiot, or whatever. And so far, it seems like we kind of got it. Thankfully, it's like right on the edge, but I'm seeing those decisions be debated. It's like, if you're going to run a Karma comp, is it 6 Dawnbringer? Is it 4 Invoker, 4 Dawnbringer? What is it? This is a hard decision. And so that part I wasn't confident on because, again, the challenge has always been if verticals are too terrible, cough, cough, set 2 Infernal, we drive away most of our player base. But if they're too good, then most of our challengers are going boring, boring, boring. I buy all the blue units, I win the game. So, but like I said, right now it seems like we're pretty damn close. So,
yeah, the other thing we just I'll say quick, we had to kind of accept, and I want to is in terms of like amount of content, 5.5 is very similar to 3.5, and both of them were 3 months after launch. 4.5 was 4 months after launch, and so we planned to do a bit more content for it. So again, do we know that we got the size perfect? No, and honestly, we really should wait, because that is no matter how much you change, we want to understand its impact across the rest of the set's life cycle, not just does it feel like sufficient in the first week, or meet some kind of bar of like, hey, if you if you have enough bullet points on the back of the box, I will play the thing again, but if you don't, I just won't play it. Like, that's not how the actual game experience plays out. So we have to be a little cautious of that as well. But yeah, so we were all I think that 85% number is about right. We were all cautiously optimistic. We were being very measured in our decisions. Yeah, there's always a chance that we were like interpreting something wrong, or made a bad call somewhere, but we made a call and we stuck to it, and I'm glad we did.
It definitely seems like it's going well so far. In fact, Set 5.5 has inspired one of my favorite things already to come out of it, which is Radiant item tier lists. And so we're going to take a look at Sox's tier list. I think this has been really fun because there's a lot of different opinions right now, and I think there's a lot of different schools of thought on how to rank these. You can see the way Sox did it right now, the utility items, and I love that he split it into utility items and carry items to begin with. I think you got to do at least that. But then saying utility items that you pick when you're undecided on a composition, which is oftentimes when you do it, and then carry items when you've committed. That makes a lot of sense. But there's some interesting stuff in there. Like, I remember you mentioning, Mort, famously, of course, you know what I'm going to talk about, that Covalent Spark, the Ionic Spark Radiant version, is the highest win rate. Is that right? A Radiant item at the time?
Wait, is it still? It was when A-Bomb was broken. It still is? Wow.
Post hotfix, it's still #1. Yep.
It is a very strong item, but the thought was that maybe it was specifically with that comp in general, but obviously down C here. Yeah, so let's talk about these tier lists for a little bit. Anything jump out at you right away besides the Covalent Spark there?
I mean, I won't meme Sox too hard for Redemption. The Challenger players are doing that for him already. But Redemption is clearly not D tier.
Yeah,
that's just a swing and a miss, but that's okay. The other thing is, remember how you were talking about like, are items easier or harder to balance? Mm-hmm. One of the thing about Radiant items is, because we give them to you all at the same time, and because our goal was literally that they're all supposed to be equal in power, which is not a goal of normal items, to be clear. Normal items sometimes are specifically better in the early game, better in the late game. I'll use Zephyr versus Sunfire as an example. If you lock in Zephyr early, you're an idiot. Zephyr late game might win you the damn game, These are all meant to be equal in power. And so it's really nice, actually, in the data, we could literally just look and like, there it is. There's the graph at 3.6. There's what happens. We can see the power level. This is great. It's actually really easy to balance. And like 11.16 was literally, and with a lot of the items, we used the Radiant bonus to make sure we had levers to just like nudge it in the right direction up and down to make sure it was going to work. So generally, I'm pretty excited about Radiant items for that reason alone. It's going to be very easy to make them interesting. And so far, I think it's like most of them are playable. I think there's a few that are too narrow, and I think that's what I think a lot of Sox's list is focused on here. Like Frozen Heart, for example. I don't think anyone's saying Frozen Heart Diana or Frozen Heart Fiddlesticks are bad, but who else you putting it on?
Right.
Not many other people. That's pretty narrow. The same is true of Morello. Morello Garen is freaking amazing, but Garen's a little weak right now. And who do you hold it until you get the Garen? And so it's less about the item's power and it's more about who can use them. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what a lot of this is coming from.
I also think the timing when you get it matters a ton, right? You talked about this in the AMA. You tested you suggested like 5 different rounds, right? All of stage 3. And even though this comes very late in stage 3, the reality is, Frozen Heart, you don't know, it's very weak at that time for sure, right? Like the holders you're talking about are 4 costs, and the chances that you're playing them on your board at that stage are pretty low. And even if you are, who plays a 1-star Diana? Like, it doesn't cast overly often, right? And so those items, in addition to being narrow in terms of your path, are also weak in that moment of time, and that's like really punishing when people are getting items that spike their boards incredibly hard in that moment.
Yeah. The other one I'll call out here, and then I'll stop jabbering, is that Ginsu's is the worst item by far. Like, that's a pretty big gap between anything else. The second worst is Jeweled Gauntlet, which Sox has in B tier. And Archangel is significantly better than Jeweled Gauntlet, which Sox has in C tier. So, there's a few things off here, but it's interesting to see everyone's players' interpretation. So.
There's no way ZZ Rot is like second worst utility item either.
No.
It's like a solidly middle of the pack item. It always does its job. It feels
it's high actually. It's like middle to high. We had a buff planned for it before we saw the data. We're like, what if it gave your entire team 10 armor? We thought that'd be kind of cool. But then we looked at the data and we're like, wait, it's in the like top 30%. We can't buff this item, and so we didn't ship it.
And by the way, this is one of the fun things about Radiant Thieves gloves. If you ever think about like reducing it, I'm going to be in the camp of strongly arguing against it, because even though it is clearly one of the strongest and will always be one of the strongest, it doesn't feel bad when you don't get it and when you see it on your enemy's board, which is kind of my litmus test here, right? It's like a little bit of a high roll. They got offered it and they have it, but it's like the randomness component. It feels like normal Thieves gloves in that regard, and it's cool because, for example, if you didn't have that, basically only memers probably were going to try the Radiant ZZ Rot, right? Because it's just like not as flashy and it doesn't immediately kind of fill a void in the way some of these other items do. But having the TG got me to observe the ZZ Rot, and then when I observed when they would roll ZZ Rot on their Thieves gloves, I was like, wait a second, this is actually pretty good. Like, this felt like it had huge fight impact. So I really like the fact that Thieves gloves is kind of putting all of these different items into the game.
Well, it's great too, because with the Radiant Thieves gloves, it's like any other Thieves gloves, right? The power of the item is to a certain extent reflected by the player using it too, right? Are you using the ore items you got? Are you positioning if you get Shroud? Are you positioning if you get Zephyr? And a lot of players, below Challenger aren't going to be doing that much. So, it may be super strong when everybody's getting the optimal usage out of it, but then in a lot of other segments of the game, it's not going to be as impactful either. So a lot of it is contextual too, which is why I love these lists, because everybody's going to have a different one, because everybody's going to have a different experience and prefer different comps and things like that. But I do think that rating it on overall usability is a good, just kind of general way to do it, So I like the way that Sox did this.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar, which is I look at a tier list like this, and it kind of reminds me of I think a very positive thing, which is it's so contextual around what you actually, the state of your board and the state of the game, the state of what you need as well, that like it's probably a big mistake if you are a newer or average player to like go have this up on your other monitor and like use this to decide what item you're going to pick. Like, that is just not going to get you to the correct decision most of the time. So I'm glad that there's a lot more evaluation that should go into this, other than, maybe, Rageblade, right? Like, hey, it might be numerically just bad enough that it does drop below, like, you should ever take this. But the good news is, we patch every 2 weeks, if not more often, and we can change that. So, like, hey, there might be stuff that's below the floor, but cool, that won't be true in the near future.
You've given yourself the ability to with some of the extra stats that get added to some of this, to buff it in that way too. If you don't buff the actual effect, you can give it some extra side stats to make it more appealing as well, which I think was smart with the rating items too, to give yourself multiple ways to improve or reduce it depending on what needed to be. But there is another tier list that we want to take a look at. Mort actually prepared his own Radiant tier list. There it is. It is simply your face being S tier. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. What was kind of the process you went through to construct the list?
Well, your face was a process.
That's what I hear that all the time.
Yeah, that's been my brand of it's been my brand of humor for a while, and I just wanted to throw some positivity out there, So
yeah,
I think before the show, and I'm going to show it on camera here for real quick, but you guys were asking me how long I've been doing this your face shtick. And this is my mug from Nintendo, and it says "I drank your face." So,
wow,
been doing this a while, but just wanted to use my humor.
One of us.
Yeah.
You fit right in, yeah. Almost like you've been around this gaming thing for a while,
Yeah, no.
All right, well, that was a great list, but it's time to move on to everybody's favorite segment. It is Agree. And we've got some good ones. Even though Frodan couldn't make it, he did think up a lot of these as usual. He's like insanely good at coming up with these. Set 5.5 has been the most successful mid-set launch thus far. Agree? We'll throw it over to the developers first, because you made it. So what do you think?
I had to go disagree, but the disagree is I don't know. It's a little too
Okay.
early. I have not been like deeply involved in looking at kind of the first waves of data. So
no predictions you want to make? No, it's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but okay, all right.
Yeah, I think it might be. So, but I'll say I don't know. So I have to disagree.
So,
Right.
yeah, I coward. No,
Yeah, totally cowardly. You get one pass, Woody. The next two, you got to be.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, data and numbers aside, like I think we'll still have some stuff to break down there. There are probably some metrics where it's not the most successful that I'm probably not going to talk about here. But I think as a player of the game, if you truly enjoy playing TFT and like wanting to play lots of different variant comps and have a cool experience and have deep strategy and things like that, if I compare it to 3.5, which was okay, but at the time I think Battlecast was like garbanzo and launched really poorly. If I compare it to 4.5, which launched with the one cost reroll meta of bleh, I think this one wins it. So I think I'm going to go with agree.
All right, interesting. So we don't often have the devs differ on opinions there, but that's interesting. Esportslaw, Bryce, what do you think?
I'm going with strongly agree. Is that an option? I mean,
Yeah, sure.
This has
I don't
been
know if we
it's
could
been
put more
one
than a
of
second there, but
yeah, double check me,
I don't know
production
if that's
team.
possible, but
Yeah, I mean, look, this has been one of the most fun weeks of TFT, I think, in the history of the game. I mean, you have Twitch
big
viewership, which is not like the be all and end all metric certainly, but it's been really high. Engagement has been really high. The players that are all like the most and I admittedly look. I can wear two hats here. I wear kind of my hat and like the people I'm most close to, which are like the heavily engaged part of the community. And for them, it is a roaring success. When you can get these like jaded, angry about everything group of players to play like they're all playing over 100 games in the first week, something is right. And like there are just so many layers of what's going right here where it feels like there's so much player agency in the game, so many different paths you can go. A lot of what was clear to me was the original intent behind the design of set 5, where you had kind of you wanted the decision making to start like AP or AD at this 50,000 foot level and then narrow your way down. It feels like that fantasy that I thought was going to come true in set 5 is really true right now in 5.5, where it feels like you can kind of flexibly slam items and pivot between the different carries and play various strong units around them. And like, are there optimal boards? Sure. But there's a lot of fluidity to the game state and how you get there. There are, I know some high-level players hate this, but like, I think it's healthy for the meta when there's some good reroll comps. What were, Cavs and MF kind of annoying to play against? Yeah, but it was more that it felt bad than that it was oppressive. We've had way stronger reroll comps before. It's just that unkillable tank situation is always really frustrating when it's like there's nothing you can do to get through it. So I mean, I think that 5.5 is like a massive success. I mean, I think it's so fun, it's so good. And
he said the same thing about 5.0, by the way.
I did, but but the thing is, the 5 was a prediction, right? I was like, I think this is what 5 is going to be, and I'm really excited about it. But in fairness, if you go back and read that post, what I did say is, I think it's going to be the best for the highly engaged player base, and I think that casuals could struggle with this set, which is kind of what happened. And I think 5.5 has bridged that divide beautifully. I imagine I have a bunch of friends that are more casual players that I've talked to, and they're loving it. And clearly the high-elo community is loving it as well. So I think 5.5 is awesome. We don't say enough nice things. Kudos, guys, and to the whole team. It really is so much fun.
All right, Bryce, with not just the agree, but the super agree. Well, we'll call it the radiant agree.
I like it.
Radiant
agree.
Nice.
Yeah, the radiant agree. I'm gonna give it an agree too, because it's and my litmus is how did my feeling about the set change from 0 to 0.5? And like my mood has improved drastically playing games. Like I don't even know if I'm necessarily winning any more games than I was in 5.0, but it's just legit more fun to play in 5.5. So it's nice to see the community sort of, embracing it again, where things were a bit rocky in 5.0. I'm personally enjoying it a lot. So and I don't think I've ever had that big of a leap in enjoyment in a 0.5 set coming out. So I'm going to give it an agree as well. And I'm sure WittRock will change his mind in time as well. But
I think he agrees, but he's hedging his bet.
Yeah, he's just playing it safe. I appreciate that. Yeah. Chat agrees as well. They think it's been the most successful. So there you go. More nice things. Let's move on to our next question here on Agree. Scouting should matter less in TFT. Wow, this is kind of a hot one. What do you think? Let's start with WittRock again.
Should matter less. No, I don't think it should matter less. I think at its baseline, scouting is one of actually the very few things that makes it an interactive PvP game. And makes it feel like you are having this shared experience. 5, we also went kind of very consciously and a little more aggressive on positioning matters and the nuances of the positioning game being important. Possibly too far. There's like people are starting to have more of the conversation of like how coin flippy are Vel'Koz and Diana, those kind of things. But I think having this like actually once you start to play the game a lot, that comes hand in hand with this whole other section of mastery around turnover turn scouting and late game micro positioning. But it's okay that that's kind of invisible for the rest of the player base. Means I think it's pretty good for the game that it matters a lot.
All right, what do you think, Mort? You've got kind of a quizzical expression on your face. I don't know if that's the right word, but you don't seem as sure.
So I'm going to take the one part of this that clearly needs to matter, that does need to matter less. This is I hold a unit and I press tab and I do the final, 0.5 second APM. And now the new one with the keybind where you right swap to left swap, where you do the keybind that quickly puts them to your bench and puts them back on the board. That part of scouting needs to matter less. Like, that's just not a test that TFT was designed to try to be testing. And I do think we have to find ways to pull that back. But the reason I'm hesitating is like, sure, even that aside though, should scouting matter less? Like, no, like scouting is the whole point. It's like, see what your opponents are doing, make plays around it, figure out how to counter them, figure out that, oh, they didn't build Last Whisper, so Ironclad's going to have high value. Like, all of that's ridiculously important and should stay important. So, like, I guess knowing that asterisk of like the APM crap, I'm still in the disagree camp.
All right. Esportslaw, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with I'm strongly disagreeing with this. I'm just going to be strong in all my opinions today. I'm the lawyer. Radiant disagree. I only get to be here one time, so I have to like really believe in these opinions.
One radiant per game.
Yes, exactly. And then I'll be retired until the next set, or, who knows. Anyway, okay, look, I think scouting is one of the most important parts of the game. I think, to Witty's point, I think one of the best parts about it is that it's unbelievably deep if you want to invest in it. But if you don't want to invest in it, it doesn't really matter. It's not like if you don't scout, you like, oh, you got your unit Zephyred and you're like, if it feels bad, it's like, okay, well, I could have moved my unit. I didn't even need to scout. Like, I can just be randomizing my own board a little bit, right? There are tons of extremely high elo players that don't really scout at all. I mean, Ray did his like Omega run yesterday. It was so much fun to watch. He was basically not scouting or moving his board at all at the end, and he was still like pushing in the highest elo lobbies. So you don't need to invest in this part of the game in order to play it at a high level, but I think you do need to invest in this part of the game if you want to like reach your peak potential, and there is infinite depth. I have a peculiar bias on this, though. I think it's like one of the most interesting parts as a player and as a caster. Nature's joked with me that like I'm the caster that will have a 2-minute conversation about moving this unit 1 hex to the left or to the right. I think that's what makes TFT a beautiful game. I really, really do, and that those decisions absolutely matter. And there's for every time we have a post where like someone like Socks solves RE positioning and is like, hey, here's what you should do, there are dozens of units that never get solved because you don't play with them for long enough. Like, for example, I'll throw something out here for the high elo community. Everyone's been positioning Heimer turret wrong since the very beginning. You all position it in corners. It should not be in corners. If you actually watch what happens, it ults based on where the turret is auto-attacking. If you put it in the corner, you're increasing the likelihood it is going to int. So like I'm watching Saint play this comp that he's like insanely good at and innovating the Heimer A-bomb strategy, right, with 5 Draconic, and he puts his Heimer turret in the corner, and every time it ults straight to the side, he's like, oh, my Heimer ult inted, and it's like, no, it didn't. You inted, like you put that turret in the wrong position and therefore had a negative externality. And so for me, when I think about, you know, scouting, it's hand in hand with positioning. I guess the last thing I'll say, because I'm kind of long-winded already, is taking a step back. I mean, I played Summoner's Rift forever, and there was a stage when you tracked as a jungler, like, you know, my red, their red, my blue, their blue, and the time. And it was hugely impactful information to have to then use in making your decisions. And Riot eventually said, hey, that's not what we want to be testing for, so we're going to put it into the game and then play the game as you will. I think TFT will get there and will just tell you who your 3 opponents are. And then it's like, listen, if you want to scout, then go for it. Or more, if you want to go the other way and like make it a little bit more random, I get it. I know that we could have an hour-long debate about this. I think there is value. I think there's value to knowing who your opponents could be, and since there is variance, I mean, look, you can have the same pool of 3 players and not. We've seen this, you know, 2 people win streaking in stage 6, both 10 fights in a row. So you can't just like this isn't, you know, it's like the fallacy, the gambler's fallacy of, oh, it's been black on the roulette wheel 10 times in a row, so I'm putting all my money on red, right? So I think as long as there's 3 boards you're positioning for, that's plenty of variability to make it hard to just like solve. And I'm fine if you wanted to say these are your 3 opponents, and so you want to get rid of matchup tracking. But if you reduce the impact of scouting specifically, I'd be really sad.
All right, he's fine with it. No, write that down, Mort. But for me, no, I think you're right. A lot of the stuff Bright said, I definitely agree with, and I'm going to disagree with this question as well, because coming from a game like StarCraft way back when, and I make StarCraft comparisons to TFT basically every other sentence. Yeah, I know it's scouting is such a great part of the game, and like Bryce said, I'm convinced anyone can get to Masters with never scouting ever any game. You can do it no problem if you have your fundamentals down, right? But on the esports side, scouting is one of the things that we get to watch that ends up being really impressive, and that's what elevates this game from just kind of a party game to a legitimate competitive endeavor, right? So we need scouting. We need it to be there for the game to be a good competitive game. So yeah, I don't think that should ever change. But let's move on to our next question. It is going to be number 3, which is, the growth of TFT will forever be limited by being contained as a game mode within the League of Legends client. Interesting. WittRock, what do you think?
Disagree. Broadly, it's still very hard to tell, like, you know, there's some cost of it being like hidden or positioned as a mode in terms of like perception. However, League of Legends is a very, very popular game, and so it's not it's hard to call that a downside as well when we get to share a lot of those elements. Also, like, maybe this is the cheaty part of the answer, but if we ever saw strong evidence that this was true, we would consider changing it. It's not like we're like dedicated, you know, we want this game to last for decades. We're not dedicated to this being a thing forever, but in kind of the immediate term, I think this is like very minor. If this has a limiting impact, I think it's very minor.
All right. Mort, what do you think?
This one's weird because I'm gonna like cheat the question a little bit in a gross way.
All right.
I'm going to say agree because if it's contained within the League of Legends client. But I think we're already seeing ways that's not actually true, and I think there's ways that could develop in the future that makes it even less true. For example, the mobile game of TFT is not in the League of Legends client, and we see growth in that space. You know, there's another part that I'm not going to talk about, but there's growth outside the League client. And then the last part is like, sure, if the button says League of Legends and that's how you get to TFT, I do think that is a limiter, because there are a lot of people that just like may like TFT but won't like League, and they won't do it. But as soon as that button says Riot Games and launches Valorant and TFT and League, all of a sudden I don't think that's true anymore. And so, like, are we a little limited by the fact that button says League of Legends? A little, yeah. I kind of agree with that. But I don't think it's going to be an issue for very long. So, and to Witty's point, like, we've also gotten a lot of benefit of that too. You know, like, we're locked inside the most played PC game in the world. Chucky G's, our unfortunate woes. Like, so, but because of that little twist of the words there, I'm going to put agree.
Okay, interesting. Bryce, what's your opinion?
I have no strong opinion about this. I see both sides. I guess I would.
Gotta pick one. Well, you don't necessarily need to pick one.
Okay, I guess no, I'm not gonna
So
pull
you
Witty.
chick it out like Witty did.
No,
with
no, no,
question
no, no, no.
one.
We don't do that here. I'm gonna disagree, but I think that it all depends on what happens with it, right? Like Mort gave a few of the different hypotheticals to like pull on a few more strings, the level of resources that Riot devotes to the promotion of TFT within the client, what winds up happening to the monetization of TFT, and whether or not it winds up ever in any way being linked to SR or other game modes, right? Like there's a lot of different levers that Riot can pull on, and the fact that it's trapped inside the most popular PC game on planet Earth is an advantage if it gets used in a really meaningful way. And we've definitely seen examples of this before. And so I think that I don't view it as forever gated. If anything, it could be a help, but there are some obvious drawbacks as well. Anecdotally, the last thing I'll say is I have a ton of friends that probably only play TFT because it's in the League of Legends client, and they come back every time the new set comes out, and the fact that it's in the client reminds them, and then they kind of go back, they play for a month, and they churn out whenever they've hit whatever their rank goal was, platinum, diamond, etc. And so there are some pretty huge advantages to being in the client that I think probably outweigh the pros and the cons, which is why I'm disagreeing, but I could see it going both ways depending on where this all goes.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. I think in this particular case, you would never want your new game normally to be like within the launcher for a game of a different name, even if it was related. Like you just generally probably wouldn't want that. But again, since it's League of Legends and there's so many players, it did obviously help kickstart TFT. So in this case, it was definitely a good thing. And we've seen that with other games like Battlegrounds, for instance, with Hearthstone. Like that's within the Hearthstone client, technically a different game, and has done very well again because of that. So it does help when you're within an already successful game client. But I do think as time goes on, there'll be more opportunity for it to break out of there, especially like if you look far in the future. We know Riot's making an MMO and all that kind of stuff. We know they're working on a fighting game. They've talked about this publicly. So it feels like there's gonna have to be a time when there is a launcher that just has everything, basically, right? If you go in sort of the Blizzard route, the Steam route, this all makes sense, right? Seems inevitable. So I'll probably disagree because I don't think it's going to be limited forever. I think it's inevitable that'll change. But there you go. Let's move on to our fourth question. This is really the most important one. This is the most hard-hitting one, so get ready for this. It's pretty controversial. Fiddlesticks isn't green enough to be an abomination unit. Agree or disagree? WittRock, go ahead.
Disagree. Like, have you looked at that unit? It's an abomination. It's the weirdest monster thing I've ever seen.
Okay.
The more serious answer partially is like, hey, we're talking about, overall origin clarity. I don't think we got it perfect with set 5. And didn't quite have the same approach for the 0.5, but we'll be looking at that in the future.
I agree. I think if you can look at that Callista and think that was okay, and then we didn't do that to Fiddlesticks, come on now. Like, that guy needs to be green. But I will say that would make it even more of an abomination because that green Fiddlesticks would be ugly as sin. And I'm kind of glad we didn't do it.
No doubt.
But, like, it's not green enough.
All right. Bryce, what do you think?
Agree. I like that fact. Right. I like the fact that we can have conversations about, like, buy all of the orange or yellow or green or blue units. Like, I think it's kind of good for the game, and particularly with the content change, like to make it a slightly more serious question with how often content rolls over in TFT, having it be visually clear in the shop specifically is really, really, really helpful. So I'll agree.
All right, I will also agree because I play a ton of Abomination, and having this one unit that's not color coordinated with the rest of my board, just like it gets under my skin a little bit. It bothers me. It keeps me up at night. So we need to start the hashtag make Fiddlesticks green or something like that. or make, I almost said again, but he never was in the first place. So just make him green. We've heard before from various frog puppets that it's not easy being green. But in this case, I think it should be. I think it's important. So please, chat.
He's more in touch with his Revenant side. He's not as bought into the abomination.
Do the colors go after the origin or the class though?
Origin, but he's double origin, so you got to split the difference. So they're very different. They're very different looking origins to each other, right? Like Rise was Forgotten Abomination, they're already kind of similar looking, so it was easy to hit right in the middle.
You're not.
Honestly, all I'm hearing is excuses for why.
Yeah, he's not swaying. He's not swaying the poll results on this one. I don't see it. I mean, the thing is, people. You don't. Revenants are like a mix and match trait that you kind of play in the late game and you do a bunch of stuff with. Whereas Abomination is like buy green units, create green monstrosity.
Hey, just wait till next week, Bryce, when everyone's playing Revenant and Assassin. It's coming. Like everyone is going to be playing that in like a couple days from now. It's starting already.
Yep.
But so then the orange fiddlesticks will pay off more, I suppose. So that's a good point. That's a good point. I feel a little bit less sure about my agree, but it's too late to change it now. I'm just trying to run up the clock because the poll is still going at this point. I think we've covered this one enough. But so let's. Oh, chat did answer. I didn't see it. Well, I mean, it's like 76% for agree right now. All right, people want fiddlesticks to be green. That's just how it is. All right. Well, that was a great segment. Let's move on to another one. Oh, we have developer quiz. I didn't even. I forgot about this. Wow. All right. So this is for Bryce and I. So do you want to introduce this, Mort, then?
Yeah. So we prepared some questions here. The first two are pretty easy. They're pretty data driven. But at the same time, we also wanted to come with some developer trivia and surprises. So the third one should be pretty fun. So right away, let's look back at set 5. Again, these are pretty easy, and chat can play along.
Don't put that pressure on me.
You know, in the Reckoning final patch, so this is patch 11.14, who was the most played 5 cost? Was it Kindred, Volibear, Heimerdinger, or Viego?
So this is pretty brutal because I literally stopped playing that patch because the mid-set finale was over, and I was like, I should be a good father for like a week, like a week of no TFT. That seems reasonable. I'm guessing Kindred because it's splashable. It was popular in popular compositions, but you could talk me into Volibear as well.
Okay, so I was playing PvE during that patch, so I didn't play a ton of that patch either, really. But I feel like it's got to be between Volibear and Heimerdinger. Volibear, especially because it's most played overall across all elos, I'm guessing too. And Volibear is a very easy one if you're a casual player. This guy has a big AoE, and I want that. And Heimerdinger's like, he's very good, but he also casts very slow, and I could see that driving casuals away. So I'm going to go with what I think the most casual one would be. And so I'm going to go Volibear. That's my choice.
All right. Well, in this one, it is Kindred.
All right.
And interestingly enough, I actually listed them in order of player.
Oh, interesting.
So Volibear was number 2. So you were close.
Okay.
And it wasn't a wide gap. It was pretty close.
All right.
But yes, Kindred was the most played. So
interesting.
There you go.
I'll ask the second one, even though Mort put these together. So in Reckoning's final patch, which 3-star 4 cost had the highest average finish at 1.4? Was it Karma, Vel'Koz, Aphelios, or Mordekaiser?
I did not put these in order, by the way.
I was just gonna say, Witty, did you pick this question? Because it doesn't feel in order. DoA, you want to go first this time?
Which 3-star 4 cost had the highest average finish at 1.4?
Basically, which one's the most OP?
That's a very high one. Yeah, I would imagine it has to be. It has to be Karma in the 5. Well, no, because Karma was dropping off a little bit then already. So no, I would guess because it's the final patch. Wow, this is a tough one. I'm actually gonna go. I'm gonna go Aphelios. Because people generally only played him when they hit that very strong late game 4 Rangers. Otherwise, you didn't see him a lot. So just by virtue of that, I'm gonna guess Aphelios.
So I agree with this. I think it's actually less, in my opinion, it's less about which one is the broken unit in and of itself, and like what is going to be around the unit when you get the 3-star version. So I'm deciding between Aphelios and Mordekaiser. I think Karma and Vel'Koz are like way too likely to end, and I don't think either of those comps capped out like so preposterously high that 1.4 makes sense. Mordekaiser was becoming a carry, and for Dragon Slayer, Mordekaiser with a carry was like absolutely disgusting. So if you pick Aphelios, I'll pick Mordekaiser, just be different, but I think those would be my 2.
Okay. Probably a smaller sample size too. What's the answer?
Space suggests that
reveal the answer, Mort?
He said these were easy.
The answer was Vel'Koz. Vel'Koz
really?
was number 1. It goes Vel'Koz, then Karma, then Mordekaiser, and then Aphelios.
Wow.
I would have thought by virtue of being picked a lot more that he would just have a lower average because there'd be a lot of people misplaying him.
Was redeemed to OP the final patch? It was, right? Was it?
Well, it wasn't OP.
Not
We
really.
saw in the tournament it kind of like fell off actually.
Yeah.
Oh, right. That's right. Okay, yeah.
But
was like an
as far as like
anti-skirmish thing.
range, we're talking about like Vel'Koz was 1.4 and Karma was 1.5. So like they're all really good.
Just talking about Aphelios was nowhere near there though, huh?
All right. For the last question, we have a bit of history. The last question's the much more interesting question.
Oh.
And I'm going to give you some history before we read the whole question here. We talked about the set 5 mechanic being a little rushed. We had tried a certain mechanic, and it didn't really pan out. And then we tried a second mechanic, and it didn't really pan out. And then we got a third mechanic, and that third mechanic we think is good, but it was a way better fit for set 6, so we put it aside. And last minute, Witty and I kind of came up with the shadow items. I don't remember the exact conversation, but I know Witty kind of like started the conversation. And I was like, oh yeah, we can make this work. And to get it to work, what happened was I said, okay, Witty, I'm going to go off on the sides. I'm going to make a spreadsheet of shadow items. We're going to make 36 shadow items real quick. And so I made a first draft, and I'll share some of them after this question. Some of them actually ended up really close to what we shipped, like the Infinity Edge one. Some of them were very far off. So this question is, from that draft spreadsheet, there was an item that said it's a shadow item, gain 400 AP, but after you cast your spell, you die. Which item was it?
Okay,
I love this.
If it is not Death Cap, then I am going to be really sad. So I'm just going to lock in final answer Death Cap immediately because the play on words would have been so good. Process of Elimination, it doesn't really make sense for Jewel Gauntlet, right? Like there's no critical anything in it. It also doesn't make sense for Morellonomicon because there's no anti-heal. So it could really only be Death Cap or Archangels, and I think just Death Cap's so good. So good.
I had this exact same thought. I'm like, if it's not like the literal Death Cap, like it just makes the most sense. We know how you guys like to play with the names and things like that. So I'm gonna pick Death Cap as well. Feels like it has to be.
You would be correct. It was definitely Death Cap.
Got one right.
Yep.
Wow. It would have been fun too. I would have played that.
Oh yeah.
So hopefully we have the screenshot here, but I actually brought a few of the other items just to show you their very first draft and how far away they were. So I don't know if we actually have those. We don't. So.
Oh, we don't have it? Oh
no. Okay. Good Twitter content.
I'm so sad.
I'll post it somewhere.
I'll post it on Twitter, but we had a few others that were pretty silly. And again, this was like I made the document at like 2:00. I checked the timestamps, and like 6:00 is when I go, here, Witty, 36 shadow items. We could do this.
Yep. And this was one that we play tested with this item as well. I don't remember it ever being good, but
Kent reminded me. No, this item on Vayne. Vayne.
Yeah. I was gonna bring that up. Yeah, Kent Wu in the chat, another designer over at Riot, bringing up the fact that Vayne gets a pretty good bonus out of that. Yep.
Vayne broke all. Vayne was like the break shadow items unit.
Yep.
So good.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was fun. I always love when you bring these questions and the sort of like behind the scene, little unknown history. Someday when we have the big TFT retrospective documentary, we'll get to find out a lot more of this stuff. It's gonna be fun. But speaking of fun, it's time to go on to a tier list. We have a very special tier list today. It is the NA feedback tier list, where the developers say who in the NA scene is the best at giving feedback about the game.
Okay, wait, before you get into this,
sure.
I asked production if I could throw a curveball. They said it's fine, but you do not have to answer, so you are not obligated. But I would love it if you did. Normally there are honorable mentions, people that did not make the list but were close. I would really like dishonorable mentions to the extent you feel comfortable.
Ooh.
I would love to have a few names that are the opposite of this list, the people who are the most, the least effective in communicating feedback about the game.
We just got the TFT community feeling positive towards the developers again with 5.5. Like,
hey, if the TFT community can dish it at these guys as much and as often as they have to put up with it, I think they should get a 2-minute platform to dish it a little back.
You're not wrong.
Okay, well we did not prepare for this, so this is off the fly. I think we can do as many as we can, and then we'll do the dishonorable mentions at the end. Witty, you want to kick us off with any that jump out?
So I'm my biggest competitor for the #1 slot is gonna be Leduc. And
He's not NA though. He's not NA.
Oh, but he's not. Oh, it's only NA. Man, this is gonna be
I
hard.
know.
I'm not starting.
I'm with you, Leduc.
You could pivot.
Legit.
You could pivot.
Should
Go.
we, should
You
we
could go
change it
global.
to international?
Go global.
It could be global. Yeah, let's go global feedback.
Okay.
Yeah.
Global
yeah.
player feedback. Then yeah, I think Leduc definitely is pretty high up there.
He's so high on my list because it's I mean, he'll give like content and like what's fun, what's not, or what's broken, what's not feedback. But he also has been the guy in the community who's done a lot of like detailed bug reporting as well. And so as a developer, like that's one of the feedback that I crave is like well reported bugs because it's one of the like, hey, this isn't like controversial of, hey, should we make this change, make the game better or worse? It's like, we just make the game permanently better by fixing bugs. So that's actually a feedback in my mind.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to think because like I don't have these in any particular order. So these are just ones that jump out to me as people who have given good feedback lately.
You can put them down and rearrange them as you go.
Yeah. I'm So Fresh has been kind enough to like message me on Twitter and be like, here's my current thoughts, and has done it in a professional manner, which is really great because I think back in like set 2, set 3, he was usually pretty angry and grumpy. He's gotten a lot better about it, so that he's on my list. I think Socks has been doing a pretty decent job of this lately.
Oh yeah.
Can be wrong sometimes, but at least he's like giving it good feedback in a professional way. And even when he wants to be critical, he would share it with us a day or two in advance and be like, I want to post this, but I'm sharing it with you guys first. I'm like, cool, thanks.
Wow.
Witty, back to you.
Somewhere on this list should be Raditz as well. He's kind of not a huge constantly giving opinions, but tries to give a well measured opinion when he does. Again, like all these, not always right in it, but it's like, hey, being like constructive about feedback, I think is very important, and I think he takes that seriously.
Yeah. Agon is interesting because I could see Agon on this list. He's clearly very opinionated, but it has done some good for the game. Like the early game, chat's bringing up the early game mattering more, and like there was some falseness in that article, but there was some truth, and that got the game to a better state. So I could see Agon. Kyun has actually been really good lately. I think Kyun has been jumping into lobby 2 and been bringing up some good points and being pretty fair about it. So Kyun would be on this list. Witty, back to you.
I got one. So there's also kind of two forms of feedback there's the like, hey, I'm gonna take the time to like write something out or give direct messages to the developer. There's also the like, hey, I'm actively streaming, and how do I talk about the game and like deconstruct the game? One that I think is one of the better, like more popular streamers that does this is ChromeX. Particularly because he's one of the more like introspective about like, hey, is the game got a problem or did I make a mistake? Right? And like doesn't always jump to game is bad, game is unbalanced, game is broken, but can be a little more measured about like, hey, here's how I could be playing better and whether or not that reflects a good game state.
I'm gonna cheat for a little bit here and put a group. I'm gonna put my Discord. There are a bunch of players within my Discord that have actually been very helpful. Whether it be isolating bugs, talking about meta, talking about like smaller corners. So I don't want to single any one particular person out in that Discord, but it's actually been really valuable.
That's legit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any of the new young guns, Goobum, Spencer, DQA, Setsuko,
Goobums has had a few interactions recently that are good. His is tricky because it's less about feedback and more about challenging, though. Like he loves to have the conversations about it and learn kind of like what we're going and why we're going, not necessarily feedback. But Goobums could be on the list. It's yeah, Iniko on the lobby 2. Iniko is also pretty good. I think Iniko deserves it actually more than Goobums.
Okay. Well, that leaves us with one more spot, unless you want Goobums to fill that other spot. Otherwise, you could put someone else in there too.
Green Tea. I'll let Green Tea fill in this last one here. Doubles. because he always gives the feedback
okay.
about how handsome everyone is, and
True.
that just makes you feel good. So I kind of agree with that one.
We didn't say it had to be game feedback. That is fair.
That's true.
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
true.
I love that. Doubles has belonged on one of these tier lists for a long time. He gets the moment of prominence he deserves.
Yeah,
Finally gets on.
And by the way, he's a very good looking dude.
that's true. It's true.
There you
Yeah,
go.
as far as order goes, I think you could mix and match these pretty intensely. I don't, other than Leduc kind of clearly being the number one, I think at that point. And the thing is, there's a lot of good feedback too. You know, kiting is hard used to give good feedback until he became a WoW player. You know,
happens to the best of us.
yeah.
Okay, the
People are
moment
saying
chat has
honorable
been waiting
mentions.
for.
Some of us never
Sorry.
left.
People are saying honorable mention Bulls, but he just says BG over and over, so no way, no way.
All right.
Okay, yeah,
All right.
dishonorable mentions. Okay,
Oh boy,
Witty, why don't you go first? Why don't you go first?
Wow.
I know what my top dishonorable is gonna be, and it's kind of that same, like, it's not the written feedback, it's stream reactions, and it's gonna be Soju. And in part, mostly it's because I can't watch Soju stream and actually get any information from it, right? He's just gonna say things about the game. He'll change his mind
broken.
5 minutes later,
It's fine.
right? Like,
It's fine.
That's
fine.
That's what brings in the viewers. That's how you do it.
And it's very
That's how you build the
entertaining,
stream.
but as a developer, I'm like, I have no idea what Soju's actual opinion is 90% of the time, so I can't usually take away anything from watching him stream.
I tuned into his stream when he was in the middle of his climb, and he was going through his own match history, like in the middle of a long stream, and he was like, okay, so the problem in these games is that I was playing, he had like 3 bot 4s with Aphelios in his last 10. He was like, so Aphelios is terrible, I'm never playing Aphelios again. And then I checked his profile like the next day, and he had like 3 firsts with Aphelios, and I was like, I don't even know what's happening anymore.
You know, you just I think every player goes through this, right? Where you just like, you have a terrible game with something, like, that's it, I'm never going to play this again. But then you have the next game, it's like, oh, this is actually a really good time to play this. I'm just going to do it anyway. You know, it's, we all have those emotional roller coasters in TFT, you know?
Yeah. Obviously I have to bring up the longtime friendless rivalry with Milk.
Yes.
The guy whose feedback includes, why isn't there enough things to buy? By the way, I'm not going to buy them. Why aren't the tournament pools bigger? By the way, unless the EV is exactly big enough, I'm not going to participate in any tournaments. And by the way, every unit is broken, but I actually only play one comp and don't know what the other 50 champions do. Cool, thanks, Milk. Thank you.
He is the TFT antagonist for sure, but every story needs one, you know?
I love Milk to death. I feel like Milk is secretly the greatest TFT player of all time that just like doesn't want to be.
+1 on
like,
that. When the
Torture
narrow
genius.
times when he's invested and he cares and you watch him play, it's like, are you just the best? Are you the best? Like what's happening?
You know the anime thing where like they put the weights on? Milk's like always wearing the weights, except the Milks are like self-imposed, and he just like doesn't want to take them off because he's too lazy to undo the Velcros. Like,
He's just gathering strength for set 6. He's just gonna be set 6 champion. Just wait.
And then
we'll see.
set 6, he's going to be set 7 waiting room.
That's right. Yep. I like the chat comment. Milk is Shadow Mort.
Yeah. Oh God.
That's you. Yeah.
The other two I want to call out, and they're not even like bad. That's the thing. I want to call them out here. Like, I'm gonna call out Saint, because Saint gives us a lot of feedback. And I was teasing before the show is I feel like Saint is the broken clock that like for every 12 things he tells us, 11 of them are dead wrong and just like not remotely true. But the one time he's right, he's super right. He's like super right, 4 weeks ahead of the meta, and it's just like, okay, Jesus. And this is Bard.
Wow.
It's looking like he might be super right on this like draconic into A-bomb 5 cost meta. But then there's other times where he's just like, isn't Aphelios busted? And you're like, no, pretty fine. Relax, dude. And then the other one I'll call out because like it's so 50-50 is Dasic. Dasic, sometimes Dasic's in a very positive mood. He's trying to help the game. He'll write those like community patch notes. He'll try to help the game. And he's a really smart, really good player, kind of like Milk in that regard, really good player. And other times he's just like, this is the worst game ever, and I'm not going to tell you why, and you should all feel bad for ever developing it, and I regret every minute I've ever played it. And you're like, okay, cool, I guess. Let me take that back to the team, and you know, so.
But also, who hurt you and where can I find you to give you a hug?
Like, do you need a hug, bro? Like,
TFT is an emotional roller coaster. It is true. When you can only blame yourself for a loss, you can't blame your teammates. The only other targets you have are the developers.
That's
just how
true.
It is.
It's
You know,
true.
if it's not me, it's the game. But
Witty, any one more dishonorable?
I think I'm good.
right.
I'm good.
okay. I think overall that was a very wholesome
Great.
segment. I like the addition at the end. You know, we've learned in this set you need Shadow and Radiant side. We got the Radiant side, we got the Shadow at the end there. So I think that was very fulfilling. So let's move on to our final section. It will be the mailbag section. And again, just to remind you, keep an eye on chat because we're going to ask chat to ask questions as well. And Mort and WittRock will pick one of the chat questions after they answer this one to award another $10 to. So do your best. Ask some great questions. But here's our question for Mort and WittRock in the meantime. Are unit synergies such as Varus, Pantheon, or Ken and Aatrox something your team thinks about prior to set launch? And have there been any unit synergies that you expected to be stronger that didn't pan out? So meaning that these champions don't necessarily share traits that would logically to go together, but their abilities work so well together, like Aatrox, Kennen, for instance, last set, that you really want to run them and find a way to make that work.
Yeah, so we think about this not as much around like, hey, let's like have this exact unit paired interaction and like expect that to play out. It's more about making sure that the game has like sufficient things that can hook into each other so that players can discover and in some sense like create these synergies themselves, right? This is why I always am cautious around things having caps, for example, or not having like the ability to interact at all. Often when it comes to like balancing, that seems like an appealing solution, right? Like, oh, what if these things just didn't work together? I see a lot of talking about feedback. A lot of times when players like are talking about why something is broken or how it should be nerfed, they'll jump straight to like, just take that interaction and make it not true anymore. I'm like, well, we don't want to do that most of the time. We want the game to have these like dynamics and allow players to feel clever about putting the puzzle together in unique ways. And has there been a synergy that I expected? I'll have to think about that. I'm not sure off the top of my head for the second part.
Interesting. Okay. What do you think, Mort?
I mean, like Witty covered it pretty well. It's like as we're playtesting, we'll find some of these, and it's like we do like to lean into them. When we can have them, they're really good. The one, Ken and Aatrox became the one that really took off, but it actually was Aatrox Ari before we launched that we were like, the ability to pull them in and then Ari make them go boom was actually the one we intended. And Vanguard Mystic Ari did take off for a bit there, so it did play out. I admit the Bulldozer one wasn't one we had really thought of beforehand, but as soon as we saw it, we were like, yes, please, like this is great. Same with Warmog's Lucian. That was another one where I'm just like, yes, this is great. I know that's not 2 units and I'm slightly diverging, but like those interactions are good. Yeah. So we definitely want to do more of those. But yeah, it's definitely hard to predict because it's also one of those things like we're already overwhelmed, like trying to just make the base interactions work, that sometimes we might miss one of the really awkward, silly ones that can work out well.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how easy is it to actually think of that stuff in advance? And it sounds pretty challenging. Yeah. All right. Well, congratulations.
I think I see the question that I think we should answer.
All right. Let's hear it.
If you could add any champion to this set that didn't make it, what would it be? Can be limited to previous ones so you don't spoil something that may come later.
Ooh.
Cool. All right. I like it. Did you see who asked that?
Let's see. The name was Skjald. Skjald.
Oh, Scald. Yeah. Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
Witty, you want to answer that first?
Great person in my stream all the time.
Add any champion to the set that didn't make it, what would it be? So half of this answer, I'll do the non-spoilery version, is we had a version of Sentinel Graves that I thought was very fun. Didn't fit the structure. Actually, kind of fundamentally, it was, hey, we want to do this Cannoneer thing, but only 2 of these are going to end up being in Sentinel. We don't want 3 Sentinel Cannoneers, and Graves not being a Cannoneer didn't sit well with anyone. Any other champion that I think that might be it, because we got a lot of the opportunities to do the champions that I thought would fit really well into the set with 5.5. We got Gwen in there, obviously Auction with a new release, and Fiddlesticks was the one that everyone pointed out, like, how is Fiddle not in the set with 5.0? And he was in an early version of it, but didn't have quite the right spell that was going to work. So that's my general answer.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna cop out and give the same two answers I always give, though. The first one is Malzahar, because every time Witty doesn't put Malzahar in a set, I dock his pay, because it's just ridiculous, and I can't believe Malzahar is not in a set.
Yikes.
And the other one that I think is just a crime that hasn't been in TFT yet is Rammus. Every time Rammus is in a set, such a unique shape.
Yeah.
It's such a fun champion, and the fact that we've gone 5 sets and there's no Rammus is kind of a crime. And like at this point, I don't even know why we have jobs. Like it's just you know,
I mean,
it's
He
kinda
has to be a
ridiculous.
5 cost. You cannot
he's one of the
phone in
very early
Rammus.
ones too. Yeah, you can just
Yeah.
earthquake the board.
Yeah, he's got to like ball around the outside of the board and then come in the middle and like earthquake the whole board and reduce armor, and I don't know.
You can run people over and push them down into the ground for a while or something. Yeah.
I've got a bonus answer since Mort wants Malzahar in the set. I want Rek'Sai in the set as well.
Oh, you already got Rek'Sai twice.
Mort loves it whenever Rek'Sai is in a set.
No.
One of the most popular League of Legends champions.
The joke is the first set we used Rek'Sai, and it was like, of all the champions, why did you pick Rek'Sai? Nobody plays this. And then we go to set 2, and there's Rek'Sai again, and I'm like, why? Why would you do this twice?
You'd same point as Rammus. Unique silhouette, doesn't look like anything.
But you didn't use Rammus.
There were eras where Rek'Sai was a very popular meta jungle champion too, so she's had her time in SR as well. But
True.
Yeah, that is interesting. We know Kale's going to be in there every time, so that's the one we don't need.
This
to worry
version
about.
of
That's,
Kale specifically.
This was a good Kale for sure. But I like set 1 Kale, but that's a whole different conversation. Well, congratulations to our giveaway winners, Vincent and Scald. I'm going to try to pronounce that sort of the Scandinavian way. That's going to be by my best attempt. I think it's pretty accurate, judging by my own personal, guess. But
Crushed it.
Enough about that. Yeah, there you go. So there's a giveaway. That brings us to the end of the show. It's been a great one. I always love having the makers of the game on. We rotate through developers sometimes, but it's always fun to have somebody from the team on to talk about the game and give a little bit more insight into what goes into making it, the thought process. Also, always super fascinating to me, and I'm sure everybody else out there too. But the time has come for final thoughts. WittRock, final thoughts. What do you want to say? Any shout outs you want to make? What do you got? The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll just say if it's not obvious by now, I'm always glad to be here. Also love talking about the game, so it's fun to do these. And I'm glad GiantSlayer hosts these. More broadly, if you haven't gotten the message of, hey, go try some Dawn of Heroes if you haven't checked it out before, especially if you got scared away by some of the early hot takes about how the set plays out, I just encourage people to play it themselves, make that judgment on their own, and see if you enjoy it or not. So keep playing TFT.
All right, Mort, what do you have to say?
The big thing I always try to call out here is, like, Witty and I are 2 of the more prominent faces on the team, but there's a whole team of people working their butts off on the game. Thank you on behalf of all of them. They all work their hearts out to try to deliver a good product. I always talk about how we're a small team and we're trying to do a lot, and they work hard to make it happen. So shout outs to all of them. Shout out to all the players who continue to support us and be positive, even through the rough times. I know set 5 wasn't the, S tier set, but, thanks for sticking around and giving us faith. And hopefully we can come back with an S tier set, or if hopefully Dawn of Heroes might be that too. So thank you. And then, yeah, GiantSlayer, you guys are super fun. Continue to be something I think we've been blessed with as a community. So thank you.
All right, Bryce, our guest co-host for the night. You did an amazing job. It's always fun to hang out and great to have you on the show here. Any final thoughts?
Thanks for hard carrying me, DoA. You're the best. More Witty, super fun, always a pleasure. Dan has some big shoes to fill. If I got 50% of the way there, I will take it. It was a lot of fun. And also, TFT is the best. Thank you for making a great game.
Well, Can't top that. TFT is a great game. Thanks for pinch hitting, as it were, showing up just kind of out of nowhere in an emergency situation, doing a great job. And thanks Mort and WittRock for coming on the show tonight. As I mentioned, always a ton of fun. And again, thanks for making a great game. And don't forget, guess what? If you like TFT content, and of course we all do, the Giant Slayer series is back. That's right. It starts on August 9th. And it goes for, I believe it's 4 weeks, actually, on Mondays and Tuesdays. It's going to be great. I love the Giant Slayer series. Froden and I casted all the original ones. Now we've got him and I coming back, of course, and then a couple others. Have the casters been announced yet? I think.
Yeah, they got announced today.
Yeah.
It's,
so it's you and
Admiral.
Admirable. Yeah, that's right. So we've got some new familiar faces. We'll say that because you've been around for a while, but still new to Giant Slayer series. But another great event put on by Wisdom, who also makes this show. They make Giant Slayer, so thanks to all the hard work that staff does behind the scenes in terms of really producing, a lot of NA's best TFT competitive content. It really has been a pleasure to work with them on this show and a lot of other stuff. So props to everybody out there for that. Props to the fans out there for watching. We love you guys. We love getting your questions and seeing your responses in chat, things like that. I don't have chat open when I'm on broadcast, usually ever, but for this I do. The one exception, it's because of you. We like you guys. But that's it. That's the show. Thanks for watching, everybody. Go play some TFT. Enjoy. Set 5.5. We'll see you in a couple weeks for another Teamfight Talk Show. Have a good night.